الكريم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Thank you all for coming out on this Saturday evening to talk about a topic that is relevant to every single one of us. And that's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ, that we're all going to die. And this topic is one that impacts every single person who ever lived and will ever live. And so for that purpose, we want to think about how can we prepare for this inevitability that one day we won't be here. And there is no exception to this, and there is nobody who has the audacity to say that this won't happen to me. There's a lot of attempts right now to study how can people live for longer and how can people live forever. But the reality is nobody's going to live forever. No matter how much billions of dollars are invested into this industry, nobody will live forever. And so inevitably, we're all going to pass one day. And the exercise of thinking about death is so fundamental to our deen. Like, look throughout the Quran, and constantly, we are reminded of the fact that tomorrow we're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The whole theme of the religion is إِلَيَّ مَرْجِعُكُمْ فَأُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. That you're going to come back to me and then you're going to be held accountable. This is the whole crux of the matter. And if this were not the matter, then it's basically do whatever you want, enjoy your life, because there's no consequence to your actions. And so this idea or this concept of estate planning that we're going to talk about today is both a secular concept as well as a religious concept. For us, it's rooted in our tradition. But there's tons of estate planning attorneys who are serving non-Muslim clients, because even they recognize that I'm not going to live forever, and that at some point, whatever I have is no longer going to be mine and it's going to go to somebody else, right? And so this is essentially the definition of estate planning. So, I mean, many of you know me as, someone who comes to lectures and I speak, but not in a professional capacity. My professional capacity is that I'm an estate planning attorney. So my entire focus is thinking about how do we protect and preserve and transfer wealth and the things that we care about most. I mean, how do we protect our families, and how do we ensure that after we're no longer here, that we can pass these assets to the next generation, to our loved ones, to our institutions, in a way that is efficient, that doesn't get stuck in the court system, that maintains some level of family harmony, that is an attempt to not squander and waste the assets. Let's say you give a whole bunch of money to an 18-year-old and then they go waste it all. So thinking intelligently about that transfer and then overlaying that entire thing as Muslims with the Sharia. So we take that entire sort of thing that exists already as a specialty within a discipline of law, and then we overlay that with the Sharia, and we try to bridge those two things together. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So this is titled Spiritual Preparation and Secular Planning. So we're going to bring two concepts and try and merge them together. And so inshallah, we're going to do this in about an hour. And I will, inshallah, take questions at the end. And then if you have specific questions for me or for Sammy, who's my operations director in the office, you can ask us afterwards. But the questions that I would like, in the interest of getting the presentation done, is that you write your questions or you hold your questions unless it's particular to that specific slide. If it's a random question about a random topic, just hold it, which all will have some time for questions. If not before Isha, then after Isha. And if it's a personal question about a specific situation that impacts you and not everybody else, then that's on the one-on-one, not in the general room. So about an hour, inshallah. And I apologize, the computer slides are not working, so you'll just bear with me. At least you can get the crux of what we have here without the animations that pop up. So we're going to talk first about the Islamic side, then about the secular side, then about the integration of the two pieces. So we're going to talk about what does Islam have to do with this? What does Sharia require? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to do? And then we're going to talk about what are the rules in the United States about property, and what is probate, and what is a trust, and how is it different from a will, and which of them do I really need, and then how can I do something that is based in Sharia but also legal? And is it even possible, or is it a conflict? So that's what we're going to talk about towards the end. So we're going to go from the study of Sharia, then we're going to talk about the secular, and then we're going to bridge the two together, inshallah. That's why we said integrating two legal systems. So now, before I start actually, since you all came out here on a Saturday night, tell me what you hope to take away from the presentation so that I can add to this list, or that I can address those concepts and make sure that they're covered so that we're not waiting until the Q&A for those things. What are some things you hope to learn? Islamic inheritance law. Okay, very good.
I want to know how can I transfer all my property from here to Bangladesh? What kind of trust you got here?
Okay, that's a hard one.
For a non-profit. For
understood. Okay.
I run 8 orphanages.
Orphanages, how do we make some?
So after my death, I want all money goes to them.
Okay, very good. So how I will rephrase your question, and I will say, how can we, what we call leave a legacy? How can we have some component of our estate go as sadaqah jariyah to benefit fuqara, masakin, masjid, school, right? All of these things. How can we make sure that we are leaving a benefit to others? That's a very good point. Yes?
Yes, how to bridge the law of land with the Sharia.
Very good. How do we bridge the law of the land with the Sharia obligations? Right? That's, inshallah, we're going to talk about that. What else? Yes?
How we proportionally
I'm sorry?
how we like our assets.
Okay, very good. What are the shares? Right? So who gets what? Okay, very good. So we'll talk about that as well. Anything else that you want me to cover? Okay, overseas. So the second question, the second time the same point came up, which is how do we deal with overseas? Either overseas assets or overseas heirs. Maybe some of the waratha are overseas, maybe some of the assets are overseas. Well, how do we deal with that? From here to there, from there to here, we'll cover both, inshallah. Actually, we'll cover it towards the end.
Specifically, revocable and irrevocable trust.
Okay, trusts.
How can we get the best benefit
Okay,
for businesses?
very good. So what is a trust? What is a revocable trust? What is an irrevocable trust? I ask these questions just to gauge from the audience, like, what do you want to get out of this time? Because you're spending an hour on a Saturday night. You want to make sure that you're getting benefit from the presentation. So revocable and irrevocable trust, I'll touch on that as well. Anything else?
LLC, same protection as the trust.
Okay, protection. Reframing that point, we want to protect what we have from, say, lawsuits, right? So we live in a society where there's a bunch of billboards with lawyers' names on them, and what are they trying to do? Trying to sue you, right? Everybody, okay? So we live in a litigious society. So how can we protect what we have? How can we protect what we have? And how can we make sure that it passes, then protecting our life and passes to those after us according to Sharia. Very good. So let me start with a story from the Quran, which I think touches on this last point about preservation of wealth. So from the maqasid of Sharia is that we preserve what we have, this wealth. There's a foundational principle of preservation. And one of the very interesting places where we see this in the Quran is actually in Surah Al-Kahf, in the story of, where do we find it? Think? We read this on Fridays, right? Think about it. What's that? Yeah. Right? So this is the story of Musa and Khidr. And Musa and Khidr are traveling through, and you know the story, and one of the three incidences that's mentioned is they come to a town, and in this town they find that the people are very stingy. Right? فَأَبَوْا أَن يُضَيِّفُوهُمَا. They're hungry, they're travelers, they come to this town, and the people, they ask for some help, for some food, and the people say, no way. And what does Al-Khidr do? He finds that a wall is there, and it's falling down, it's crumbling, it's kind of falling apart. And what does he do? He rebuilds it. He rebuilds it. So what does Musa alayhi salam do? He says, you could have asked them for some money. You know, we're hungry. Remember, we're hungry, and you're building a wall. You could have asked them for some money so that at least we could then go and buy some food. And Musa al-Khidr then tells him what the reason for rebuilding the wall was. And what was it?
Helping the orphans.
There was two orphans. They were orphans, and their father, he buried the wealth for them. In essence, he's doing what? He's doing estate planning, in his version. He buried the treasure, the wealth for them, knowing that these stingy people, if they understood that this money belonged to orphans who were too weak to obtain their own wealth, they would come and do what? They would take it. They're not even giving the traveler, the hungry traveler, the prophet, the noble, righteous, people, they're not even giving them food. Imagine if they knew that there was a lot of wealth that belonged to these two orphans, they would have taken it. And so he buried it, he preserved it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about him, وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا, that their father, and in some of those tafsirs it says even generations above, was a righteous man. So one of the things that I'm presenting this frame is to realize that this action of attempting to preserve your wealth in a way that is intelligent and smart, and from potential creditors, and from the government, and from taxes, and from the whole system, is actually a noble act. And it converted with this intention from just a secular exercise to one that brings you benefit and reward. I mean, it's amazing. And this is like the only in Islam. Right? So now, I'm going to start, as we said, with Islamic inheritance law. So, when we talk about any discipline, either if it's in Sharia or if you are studying engineering or biology or you are studying calculus, you need to understand what is the definition of that subject. Right? So if I'm talking about a subject and you think I'm talking about water and you think it's milk, and you have the same words, we're confused. So what is inheritance law? It's the science that deals with what happens to a person's assets after death. The science that deals with what happens to a person's assets after death. Well, what are assets? What are assets?
In any form.
An asset is something that produces income.
Whatever. Right? What was another answer?
Something that produces
Anything. Anything that's yours. So we're thinking about and planning for whatever is yours. Let me make it simple. Your stuff. Is that easier? Right? Planning for your stuff. Whatever you have, those are your assets. So you have to understand that if we're going to talk about shares and fractions, which we will in the Quran, you have to understand, well, what is mine? What is the stuff that this applies to? That's number one. Also, very critical is that we also think about debts. So we have assets, and we have, on the other hand, what? Liabilities. Right? So we have assets and we have liabilities. It's critical that we understand both what are our assets as well as what liabilities we have. We live in a society that is based on debt. The whole financial system is based on what? Debt. And Muslims often have a lot of debt. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take us out of debt and make us all debt-free. If a person has debt, it's very, very, very critical that they understand what's going to happen to that debt when I die. You can't just borrow and take it and just say, okay, well, when I'm gone, someone else will deal with that problem. No, like we have a responsibility that extends beyond death with respect to ensuring that those debts are paid, and we'll talk more about that. So the principles are essentially that everyone's going to die. كل نفس ذائقة الموت. Everybody's gonna die. And everybody has some stuff. Everybody has some assets. You know, the Quran says, مِمَّا قَلَّ مِنْهُ أَوْ كَثُرَ. Either they're a lot, they're a little, but everybody has something. And that something needs to be distributed نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا according to the Islamic shares. Okay? And the principle is whatever stuff you have, you can't take it with you. You know, like the Egyptian pharaohs, they have the story, they used to bury their wealth with them. Like, right? That's what they say, right? That they put all their gold and stuff inside of the ground with them. I mean, if someone did that today, everybody would say, what? They're crazy. Like, that's illogical, irrational. If you saw the richest person and they are putting in a whole bunch of jewelry and gold and all these things in their grave, everybody would say, that's insane. Why? Because everybody recognizes once you're dead, that has no benefit to you. And that now belongs to somebody else. Now think about it for a minute. There are a few possibilities of how wealth can transfer. So in any society, there's a few possibilities. One is that when someone dies, whoever's the strongest can take it. Like in other words, if I pass away and I've got stuff left behind and there's no rules, what happens? Anyone can rush and try and take whatever they can take, and they can beat the other person up and they can take it. That's one possibility. Obviously that would lead to absolute chaos, right? Another possibility is that it goes all to someone. Another possibility is that it goes all to someone else, or that there's a set of rules. So in every society, there is a set of rules. Every society has a set of rules, otherwise there would be total chaos. So in the US, there are state laws which govern who gets what after you die. Those are known as intestacy laws. They're known as intestacy laws. And in Sharia, there are also laws which effectively are intestacy laws. That after death, these people are going to get these things in these shares. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about them and we'll cover them. Right? And the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most perfect. So we're all going to die, we all have stuff, we can't take it with us. Somebody else has to take it. Now, here is the final point which I want to make very clear, which is for those of you that immigrated to this country from a different country, that is a Muslim majority country. This exercise of estate planning is not typically one that is done. In other words, if you are from any Muslim country, you don't have to do anything in advance of dying, correct or no? Correct. Why is that? Why? Mirath. So no matter how secular the country is, one thing that is still preserved in all of the Muslim countries is mirath, inheritance law. No matter where you go, that is still the law. So they have codified the Quranic rules. They might have abandoned most of the other rules of Sharia, but they still have preserved the rules of mirath, of inheritance, in their system of law. No, almost with no exception. There's a little bit of changes here and there, but for the most part, these rules still apply. So you don't have to make a will, you don't have to make a trust, you don't really need to do anything if you're in Bangladesh, if you're in Egypt, if you're in Syria, if you're in Pakistan, if you're in all of these different countries. Right? Because as a matter of default system, this is what's going to happen. Now, yes, there is dhulm, yes, people steal, yes, it doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, but at least at a conceptual level, it's already in the system. What is the difference here in America?
Government will take it.
The government will not necessarily take it. It's good for business to say the government will take it to scare people, but the government will not necessarily take it. But what happens? The legal system will be governing, and that system is not our system. That's the gist of it. Is that the government's rules are not Islamic rules. And in order to achieve the Islamic rules, you must plan in advance. This last point is the one I want to drive home, which is to say, there is really no way you will achieve the Islamic inheritance distributions if you don't make a plan. Okay? Now your plan might be as simple as to say to your wife, if I die, I want you to do it, and if you die, I'll do it for you. Does that work?
Well, let's say if you guys both die at the same time.
Oh, very good. So what if you both die? It might work if one of you dies and there's an amana and you have an understanding that she's going to give to them and he's going to give to her and so on and so forth. Maybe. It's not really a plan, it's a hope, but it's possible. But what if, la Allah, you both die? Then what? Right? So now we don't have a solution. You're going to tell your little kids to do anything. At that point, you must have a plan. Right? So that's very good. So now, talking about from an Islamic perspective, the goals and wisdoms of inheritance law. So one of the questions I get so frequently is that why? You know, like I don't really understand these rules. Why it's 2024 and you know these rules they seem like antiquated. Are they still applicable today? I don't understand the wisdom here. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَصِيَّةً مِنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَلِيمٌ. وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَلِيمٌ. I mean, it's incredible. When you start to think, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you He knows the most. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows these rules, why He set them. He has the benefit of people, and He knows what's best for society. And if we look at Sharia as a whole, the system is intended as something that is beneficial to society. Now, yes, it might be in certain cases that there are needs, but at a societal level, right, the rules are going to benefit society if society as a whole applies it. Now you're going to say, well, there's a special needs child, there's this, there's that. And that's situational, right? And we can talk about the situations, but in general, the rules are there. So we're trying to follow the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, attain His pleasure, avoid sin and punishment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا وَذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ وَمَن يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ نَارًا خَالِدًا فِيهَا وَلَهُ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. It's actually one of the scariest ayahs in the Quran. Most of the time, when you look in the Quran and you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Jahannam and He talks about خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا, He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَكَذَّبُوا. He talks about disbelief and rejection. In most of the ayats of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about those that are going to be in hellfire forever. It's based on kufr and it's based on rejection. There's a couple places, though, subhanAllah, in which Allah talks about Jahannam forever, and He does so not in the context of kufr and not in the context of rejection of prophets and such, but one is right after the ayats of inheritance. The other is with respect to riba. الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا. If you look at that ayah, it says, فمن جاءه موعظة من ربه فانتهى فله سلف ومن عاد فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. Right? So very scary ayat when it comes to financial dealings. Like things we take very lightly. You know, I just want to do whatever I want. It's my life. I'm going to borrow. I'm going to give. I'm going to whatever. Not thinking about it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very clear about financial transactions and dealings in life with respect to riba and also post-death with respect to inheritance. So that's why it's so important. Now, the other part that's so valuable in this is that there is a component of our wealth that we can leave to the institutions, the organizations, as sadaqah jariyah, right? And that's part of what this is about, which is encouraging charitable activity for the institutions, the good, needy, and others. And this is a very virtuous knowledge. There's a hadith, there's some question about the validity of it. But it says تعلموا الفرائض وعلموها فإنه نصف العلم وهو ينسى وأول شيء ينتزع من أمتي. That this is half of all knowledge. And some attribute this statement to the Prophet ﷺ and some to, I believe, Sayyidina Umar. But why do you think it's described as half of all knowledge? Why do you think so?
Why?
I mean, why do you think it's described as half of all knowledge? What are the reasons here? What do you think? Yes.
You're passing your wealth to the next generation.
Good. You're passing the wealth to the next generation. But why is that half of knowledge? Why isn't zakat called half of all knowledge? Or salah? Yes.
Which means you don't tell people.
I'm sorry?
Which means you don't tell people.
Yes. There's things that you're not telling people. There's a few many different explanations that ulama give. One is that, think about how many relationships are impacted by inheritance. How many relationships are impacted? How many fights? Let me reframe. How many people have seen a dispute about inheritance? Anybody? Everybody, right? This is something cross-culture, cross-time, cross-place. People fight about money after people die. I mean, even the most tight of families, where you think there's no way, right? You see, how are these two people like fighting about this? It's only money, and yet people are fighting. This is human nature, right? The other thing that's so fascinating is when it's described as nisf al-ilm, the ulama say everything you learn in your life, you apply it during your life. Everything that you learn, salah, tahara, zakat, right? Fasting, you learn about how to deal, what are mu'amalat, all these things you learn, you apply them during your life. The only thing that you need to do after you die is ensure that your wealth is distributed according to Sharia. After you die, you have to ensure that your wealth is distributed according to Sharia. How can you do that unless you learn the rules and then you make a plan to ensure that that happens? Right? I mean, it's fascinating from that perspective. And this hadith, it mentions that huwa yunsa, and it will be forgotten. And the first thing that is lifted from this ummah. Now, this is incredible. And in another narration, it's mentioned that a time will come when you will find that two people will be disputing about inheritance and they won't even be able to find someone who can resolve the dispute. And I think, subhanAllah, this is the prophecy of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that you look today, all of you have been, alhamdulillah, blessed to be inside of a masjid, and probably heard hundreds, thousands of khutbahs and halaqas, right? The topic of inheritance law, by and large, right? I'm sure the Shaykh has addressed it, but by and large, if you travel the Muslim Ummah, you will find that it's not a topic that people talk about. It's not a topic that is discussed, right? And so then you bridge on top of that, how do we do it in America? And it's even less of a conversation. And so that's why it's so important. So, now the beauty is this comes directly from the Quran. So what do I mean by that? If you wanted to know how to pray, could you find the answer in the Quran? You cannot. What does the Quran tell us? Aqimus salah. Pray. Establish the prayer. Atu zakat. Right? Give zakat. كتب عليكم الصيام أتموا الحج والعمرة لله. It gives broad general injunctions with some rules, a few, right? إذا كنتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا, right? When you're getting for salah, make wudu, etc. Right? Some basic parameters. But does it tell you that Dhuhr is 4 rakats? Does it tell you that Fajr is 2? Does it tell you, what things break your fast? A little bit, but not much, right? The details of the fiqh doesn't come in the Quran for almost any of the subjects of fiqh, the details. But what's so fascinating is that on the subject of inheritance, almost everything is found in the Quran. And the crux of it comes in 3 ayat. Ayat number 11, ayat number 12, and 176 of Surah An-Nisa, chapter number 4. That's going to give you the whole sort of general understanding of ahkam al-mirath. Yes, you need to know what are the asal, what are the rules and things like that. That will come in the books of fiqh. But generally speaking, you can get most of inheritance law in the Quran. Why again do you think this is the case? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is legislating, making it crystal clear that these rules are binding and that he knows best. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, لِلْرِجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ مِمَّا قَلَّ مِنْهُ أَوْ كَثُرَ نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا. For men there is a share in what the parents and the nearest of kin have left. And for women, there is a share in what the parents and the nearest of kin have left. Now, prior to the rulings of inheritance law in the Quran, what was the state of Arabia? Like, what were the inheritance rules in Jahili times? What did women get?
hace pago de
Women generally didn't get anything. Women generally didn't get anything. What's an exception?
There was no sons.
There's a very noteworthy exception that jumps out, right? Which is what? Who inherited?
Amen.
No, but what woman, famous Sahabiya, Sayyidina Khadija radiallahu anha, inherited, right? So there were circumstances where women would inherit, but generally in the absence of male relatives, right? Generally speaking, women inherited nothing. For the most cases, women were not inheriting. Now, what's interesting from a grammatical standpoint about this ayah? If you think about it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making so clear. There's a repetition in the ayah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لِلْرِجَالِ وَلِلنِّسَاءِ, right? Men and women, they get their shares. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for men, there will be shares. For women, there will be shares. Very making it clear that the right of a woman to inherit is going to be absolute in the Quran. Okay? Absolutely, if you have a daughter, she will always inherit. If your mother is alive, she will always inherit. If your wife is alive, she will always inherit. These three relationships, they will always inherit. The amounts may change, but they will always be inheritors, which is a very different system from the Jahili times. And also, even like a little bit pre-modern in sort of Western Europe, it was the case that women would not inherit until really modern times. That the oldest male child would inherit, for example, right? And that it was assumed that there was no real reason for women to inherit. And we see that even in the hadith, you find in the tafsir literature that the Sahaba, they believed that inheritance initially was based on the right of someone to fight. So one of the Sahabiyat, she goes to the Prophet ﷺ and asks, like, I'm not getting my share. And the male relative who inherited said, Ya Rasulullah, she can't ride a horse. She can't carry a sword. So why does she need the money? Like, that was the sort of understanding in pre-modern times that the responsibility was the man and he's going to do everything. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear that women inherit. Now, the priority of distributions, okay? The first thing that happens when we think about death is that there are funeral and burial costs. That comes out first. Funeral and burial expenses come out first from the estate. Now, generally what happens is that family members will probably pay that, but they are allowed to be reimbursed from the estate of the decedent. Decedent is known as the person who dies, right? So, alhamdulillah, in our community, what's the cost of the burial? About four, right? Something closer to four. So that's the expectation of approximately around $4,000, right? And sometimes I travel to other communities. In California, it's maybe 10,000, 12,000, etc. Right? Some places it's more expensive to live and it's more expensive to die, right? So this is important because you want to make sure you're not burdening somebody else. So the first thing that comes out is funeral and burial expenses. The second thing is debts, duyun. And the Prophet ﷺ, he wouldn't pray janazah on someone who had debts outstanding. I mean, think about this. Like, we take it so lightly. Now, this is really complicated of a discussion because is there a difference between a mortgage and, like, if I borrow $5,000 from you? Yes. The $5,000 needs to be paid back, right, before anything else happens. The structured debt, which is contractual and has a built-in provision for what happens when I die, right, is going to follow the provisions of the lender's obligations, right? So potentially that debt can be assumed, that debt can be negotiated, that there's different considerations. But sometimes, I deal with post-death stuff a lot as well. And sometimes I'm surprised because, someone comes, the family comes and they say, my husband, my wife, they had this credit card debt of, $10,000, and it's okay not to pay it, right? I mean, this is money they borrowed to purchase things. Why is it okay not to pay it?
It's too
Huh?
So the big companies, they will write it off anyway, right?
Perhaps, but if they don't, right? What I'm trying to say is that we take these things very lightly. Oh, it's a big company. Who cares, right? Yes, if they forgive the debt and they say it's fine, it's fine. But ultimately, what we borrow, we need to pay back. This is Islam, right? And so it's very important to understand debts. And in this category, there's also something known as huququllah, right? Debts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this generally comes under the sort of umbrella of missed obligations. So for example, a person has enough money to go for Hajj. They have the niyyah to go for Hajj, but they've never been for Hajj. If they die, are they accountable for not going for Hajj? I mean, you had the money, you had the means, you had the time, you didn't do it. So, essentially, one of the things that people can do, now this is not like a buy your way out of jail type of card, but the idea is you can stipulate that, like, I have this intention to go for Hajj. If I die before, I'm setting aside $10, $12, $15,000 so somebody can perform Hajj on my behalf. Some of the Madhahib and Hanafi madhab, some of the missed obligations, fast and salat and things like that, can also be accounted for and should also be accounted for in your wasiyah. That you write and you say that I have, this many missed salah and things, and I'm trying to make them up, or I'm trying to pay the zakat, or I want to make up the fast that I missed, but in case I die, then I want someone to pay fidya on my behalf. This is the difference of opinion within the Madhahib. Then we have the wasiyah. So, if you look at large non-profits in the United States today, why was it that so many institutions were the divestment movements on college campuses? Why were they so important? Like, why was there such a big deal about trying to have these protests on college campuses? Yusuf knows.
Because of the funding, they're getting money.
Because the endowments of these institutions are massive. Understand that the endowments of these institutions are absolutely massive, in the tens of billions of dollars. Okay? And so for that reason, they are, able to be perpetual. And most of their large gifts come in the form of planned giving, much of which comes upon death. Someone dies, they leave $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, right, to Harvard University. In fact, if you look at the history of Harvard University, it was started by a guy named John Harvard, who died when he was in his 30s, and he left half of his wealth to build a library for an institution that had not yet even been built or named. So they named it Harvard College after John Harvard. And now it has an endowment size that's bigger than the GDP of most countries. It's incredible. Think about what we can do for our institutions. Think about how much as a society, as a Muslim community, if we stipulate up to a third to go for these, as sadaqah jariyah in cases that are appropriate, it'll be absolutely amazing if you think down 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years from now. We don't have to constantly be fundraising in Ramadan because the waqf is established and it's paying for all of the expenses of the masjid. That's how it's supposed to be, and that's how traditional Islamic societies work, right? If you go to historical Islamic societies, the areas around the masajid, what were they? They were awqaf, they were waqf. Right? The stores, the rent, all of this stuff was paying for the institutions. And that's what we want to try and replicate. The remainder is the fara'id, the wasiyah, the mirath. So now, just what is this wasiyah share? It's based in the hadith of Sayyidina Sa'id bin Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, and he says that, Ya Rasulullah, innani malan kathira, walaysa yarithani So he says to the Prophet ﷺ that I only have daughters. And I only have a daughter to inherit, rather. I only have a daughter to inherit. And can I give my wealth to charity? Can I give most of it to charity? Prophet ﷺ, he says, he said, أَفَأَتَصَدَّقُ بِثُلُثَيْ مَالِي. Can I give 2/3 of it in charity? Prophet ﷺ says no. He says, how about half? The Prophet ﷺ says, لا قلت فالثلث قال الثلث والثلث كثير. He says you can give 1/3 and 1/3 is a max. Even a third is a lot. So what we learn from this hadith is that if someone has young children Should they give a third of it to charity? If you have young kids, should you be giving a third of your wealth to charity? No. Right? In fact, the remainder of the hadith is that it's better for you to leave your children not dependent on others. So if someone has young kids, you don't go and give all your money to charity. That's not smart. But if their kids are adults, right, and they're already married and they don't have any expenses and they finish school, then it's a great opportunity to do what? Sadaqah jariyah, right? Build your own sadaqah jariyah here, and you can even compound it with your own foundation or your own waqf, right? Your own small non-profit, which we can talk about at the end, but that's a very powerful way to couple the two concepts together. So, after all of these things, we get to the distributions in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in 2 verses lays out most of the rules. So He says, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a wasiyah regarding your children. For the male child is double the share of the female child. Why is that?
Because he's going to take care.
You said boys are better than girls? Yes. So, no, it's not boys are better than girls, right? It is based on a system in which there is financial obligations and responsibilities that the male is responsible for. الرجال قوامون على النساء. Now you see all of these things come together. If you try and implement inheritance in a vacuum, it doesn't work. If you don't couple inheritance with the idea of qawama, of responsibility, then it doesn't make sense, right? Why does the boy get double the share of the girl? He doesn't have anything to do, he just takes double, he doesn't do anything with it. No. He has responsibilities that are affiliated with it. Now the question we get every single day in the office is, do I really need to do that? Like, it's 2024, right? And what if my son doesn't do that? And, I don't know, right? It's just a constant question people have. Now understand that there is a natural, I had 3 boys and I have a baby girl. So now I can understand where people come from, right? That there's this notion of is my daughter going to have enough? Is she going to be protected? I want to make sure. That's human. And that's fine to grapple with this and be like, I'm uncomfortable with it. But at the end of the day, what is Islam? Islam is submission. You don't have to love the rule, right? You don't have to love the rule, you just have to do the rule, right? Maybe you don't want to wake up for Fajr. You still wake up for Fajr, right? At the end of the day, it's about submission, understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed these rules, made these rules, and He will take care of my family, right? And part of this is tarbiyah, that you got to train your kids to make sure that the boys take care of the girls. That's part of raising the child. They're going to get double, and they're going to be responsible for taking care of their wife, for taking care of their daughters, for taking care of their mom, and for taking care of their sisters potentially. That's the role of the boy. Now, yes, there's a lot of guys who don't do these things, and they won't take care, and we know that they're not good people. All of that, I understand, right? That's situational, but in general, the rule is such. So Allah says, فَإِن كُنَّ نِسَاءً فَوْقَ اثْنَتَيْنِ فَلَهُنَّ ثُلُثَا مَا تَرَكَ وَإِن كَانَتْ وَاحِدَةً فَلَهَا النِّصْفُ. Allah says that if there are 2 or more daughters, they're going to take 2/3 of the estate. And if there is 1 daughter, she's going to take half. وَإِن كَانَتْ وَاحِدَةً فَلَهَا النِّصْفُ. So first, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about which relationship? Children. Why? I mean, it's the most from your heart. The parent, every society is concerned about their children. They care a little bit less about the other relationships, right? But children is the natural thing. So the Prophet the Quran talks about the rights of the children distributions first. وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ. Now Allah moves to the parents. So we move from this ayah is about children first, then about parents. وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ مِمَّا تَرَكَ إِنْ كَانَ لَهُ وَلَدٌ. فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه فلأمه الثلث فإن كان له إخوة فلأمه السدس. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the rights of parents. Now, He says that essentially, if there are parents, they usually get what? 1/6 each. وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ. They each get 1/6. But then it depends also. وإن كان ولأبويه لكل واحد منهما السدس مما ترك إن كان له ولد فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه فلأمه الثلث. So if there are no children or siblings, then the mom is going to get what? فلأمه الثلث, 1/3. So the mom's share is going to change in that scenario. But if the decedent the mayyit had 2 or more siblings, then the mom's share is going to drop back down to So understand how precise the rules are. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. The Quran lays out these fractions over 1400 years ago, and they're still perfect and they're still applicable today. These are the rules. Now, this is so different from American society and tradition. Because if you have children in the United States, in every state in the country, under the default rules, what do your parents get? 0. Exactly. If you have children, your parents get nothing. But this ethic in our tradition of birr al-walidain is essentially extending post-death, even beyond your death. And I'll come to the end of the ayah which explicates this point. Allah says, مِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِي بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. After the wasiyah and the duyun have been paid. Yes?
2 and 3, where the rest go?
Good. Where does the rest go? So we said daughter gets half. What happens to the rest of it? The rest of it is going to be asaba. The rest of it is going to be given to the asaba, which are the residuary heirs, which is a whole schedule. We'll come to it in a minute. Okay? And then Allah says, آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا. So, it's really amazing. Let's say you have a 2-year-old son and you have a 75-year-old father. Which of them deserves your money more? How many of you would say the 2-year-old son? About half. How many of you would say 75-year-old father? Just one. Why do you think the father needs more, deserves more? He's an old man. He needs attention.
Yeah.
You need to take care of him. It's maybe also that you're indebted to him. He gave you everything, right? So he needs it. Why do you say the 2-year-old? He's got his whole life in front of him, right? So this is like a law school exam. You can make an argument for either of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing out, آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا. The point is, you don't know. He says your parents, your children, you don't know which one of them is going to bring you more benefit. You don't know. You could arbitrarily make a good case for the 75-year-old. You can make a great argument for the 2-year-old. And what about the sister? And what about the mom? And what about all these other people? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, you don't know. In Allah kana aliman hakima. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most knowledgeable, most wise. At the end of the ayah, when you're thinking like, I don't know about this, Allah then says, in Allah kana aliman hakima. Allah is most knowledgeable, most wise. Like he's preempting the thought that comes in your mind. Then he says in the second ayah, number 12. Now we went over which relationships? Kids and parents. What's next? Spouses, right? So وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِن لَّمْ يَكُن لَّهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَإِن كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَلَكُمُ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُم مِّن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِينَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the widower, the man. So if the woman dies and she has children, if she doesn't have children, what does the husband get? It's on the screen.
It's the whole thing.
It's on the screen. So the husband gets nisf, half. And if she has children, if she has children, فَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَلَكُمُ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ. You will get 1/4. If the wife dies, she has children, the husband is going to take 1/4. Okay? Now, we go to the inverse about if the husband dies. وَلَهُنَّ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ إِن لَّمْ يَكُن لَّكُمْ وَلَدٌ فَإِن كَانَ لَكُمْ وَلَدٌ فَلَهُنَّ الثُّمُنُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ. What does the wife get? The widow. She gets, if the husband doesn't have children, she gets 1/4. And if he does have children, 1/8. And if there's multiple wives, a fight? Is that what he said? There would be a fight. So everyone would split the 1/8. Big fight. Okay? So this is the share for the spouses. Now the question that should be coming in one's mind is of what? What are we even cutting up? We're going to come to that in a second. Okay? So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, من بعد وصية توصون بها أو دين. Remember, after the wasiyyah and the duyun have been paid. وإن كان رجل يورث كلالة أو امرأة وله أخ أو أخت فلكل واحد منهما السدس. فإن كانوا أكثر من ذلك فهم شركاء في الثلث من بعد وصية يوصى بها أو دين غير الله وصية من الله والله عليم حليم. So we said a situation where a person has children, a person has children, then they have parents, then they have spouses. What's the other scenario? A person has
Brothers, sisters.
neither children nor parents. A person has no ascendants or descendants. That person is going to be known as who? Kalala. Allah says in ayah number 176, which is the last ayah, يَسْتَفْتُونَكَ قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ فِي الْكَلَالَةِ. So there are 2 ayats here on kalala. When a person, there's difference of fiqh on what is kalala, right? But generally speaking, if you don't have a vertical line, then things will start to go horizontally. Okay? So if you don't have a male up or down, meaning a child, grandchild, father, grandfather, then you're going to start moving laterally into siblings and so on and so forth. Okay? So this ayah addresses the kalala. Okay? I'm going to skip it in the interest of time, because most of the time when we're thinking about estate planning, people usually have these relationships, either parent, child, spouse, right? And then sometimes siblings, and then if none of those, then there's more flexibility. It goes more remote, and then in some cases, there's even more. Okay, so this slide did not work, but essentially what, this is supposed to be on the computer, but you can't see it on the phone. So essentially what was happening here is, let's take a hypothetical where Ahmed and Sarah are married, and Sarah passes away, and they have 3 children, and Sarah has a mother. So let's do the math. Okay? So, the wife passes away, what does the mother get in Sharia? We're talking Sharia first. What does the mother get? 1/6. What does the husband get? Robo, right? He's going to take 1/4. Okay. What's left? They have 3 kids. 2 daughters and a son.
Son half.
And the daughters?
1/3 each.
Quarter each. Okay, so this was the question about what happens to the rest. So in this case, the wife, the mother, and the husband become their Dhawil Furud, they are Quranic heirs. The children become Asaba. And from the Asaba, it's the Dhakari Mithlu Hadl Thuntayn. It's 1 share, it's 2 shares for the boy and 1 share for the girl. So you cut it into 4, and the daughters are going to take 1/4, and the son is going to take 1/2. Okay? Now this is the point at which I'm going to transition from Sharia to what do we do in America. So this is conceptually what happens. What happens in the absence of any planning if Sarah dies under Arizona intestacy law?
What is it?
Who gets what? Husband gets everything. Under Arizona law, if you have children, what does the husband get? The spouse gets? Children from a combined marriage, the spouse is going to take everything. What does her mom get?
Nothing.
Big 0. Right? She's not going to get anything. Yes?
Is it based on residency? So like, say for instance, obviously, you live in Arizona, like you go to New York and you die there.
Mm-hmm.
Do they base it on?
It's based, their state laws differ slightly, And the application of which state law would apply also differs based upon, domicile, different concepts. But to keep it simple, right? So if you're an Arizona resident and you die, you're going to have everything go to your spouse. Now, most people don't think that's a big problem. Because generally the assumption is if I die, my spouse will take care of it, right? Like, we've been married a long time, he or she will just do what they're supposed to do, they'll give everyone what they're supposed to give. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's fine and reasonable and probably happens some of the time. But it's not a great plan. Why is it not a great plan?
It's complicated, we got remarried and.
Perfect. So it gets complicated if
Remarry.
remarriage makes it incredibly complicated. Okay, but what else besides remarriage? Remarriage is the one that absolutely throws it off, right? Absolutely throws it off. And actually, remarriage is not like so out of the realm of what happens usually. Like people get remarried. Like we've seen many cases where there was the spouse gets everything, and now they're trying to figure out what was I supposed to give to who and this and that after I got remarried. But remarriage is a big one. What else? The second spouse passes away. Messy again. Spouse is incapacitated, not knowledgeable, just grieving, doesn't want to do it, etc. Yes.
Yeah, they might not want to apply this way.
They might not want to apply the Sharia. A big problem, right? It was your responsibility. You left it on your spouse. Now, maybe if you talked about it, maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't work. My point is, it's not a great plan. And this was a question that happened earlier: was what if you both die? Statistically, one is going to die before the other. But if possible, Yaser Afia, something can happen to both people. So in that scenario, again, we have no spouse to count on. Now, so a few years later, we said in this scenario, Ahmed gets married to Hajj, and Hajj has kids from a previous marriage. Now what happens on Ahmed's death? What happens on Ahmed's death? What does Hajj get? Hajj gets not necessarily everything, but half of the community property, all of the separate property. What is community property and separate property? I'm going to mention it in a second. Okay? And what was the mom? Remember the mom? What was her name? Aisha. Right? Sarah's mom. Does she get anything? She got absolutely zero in this scenario. Right? So her mom got nothing. Her husband's new wife took half of her stuff, right? Big problem, right? That wife's kids will eventually get the money that should have gone to her kids, right? On her death. So it's a messy sort of thing, and it's important to clarify and ensure that the relationships flow correctly. Now there's another problem here, which is to say, in order to do this, you must understand a few points. In order to understand the application of Sharia, you must understand a few points. And this is where I think most of the self-help tools fail. Right? Like this question of can I go download a will off the internet and make it work? Maybe. But I think it fails because most people don't understand property law. Like none of you went to law school. And so you don't understand property law nuances. If you learn them, then maybe. But it's critical. So for example, you have a joint account. Who gets the account on the first person's death? The other person. Doesn't matter what your will says. It does not matter. Understand this point. Your will makes no difference. Okay? What about your 401k? The beneficiary, which is almost always who? The spouse. Does your will matter? You've been a nice Islamic will. You printed it out, you signed it, you got witnesses, you got it notarized. Does it matter? It does not matter. What about your house?
With the spouse.
Right? It's a right, right? So the point is, most of the assets that a person has, they are non-probate assets, which means they are automatic transfer assets on the first death. Which means if you make a will, it does absolutely nothing. I mean, most people, every time people are going for Hajj, they say, oh, I gotta go for Hajj, I gotta make my will, I gotta make my will. The reality is, you make your will, you don't make your will, it's not gonna do anything on the first death. Because everything's gonna go to the joint, I'm talking about in a married couple scenario, right? It's gonna go to the other person. We're going to come to the trust in a second. Yes?
It's not a good question. In a house situation, let's say you have a house, you're married to your wife, but she's not on the deed, she's not on the house. You die, so you put her on the house.
It's about title. Everything is about title.
Arizona law.
If she's not on the deed, then you go to probate.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So understand, what is probate? Somebody tell me what is probate. Has anybody dealt with probate? Anyone in the room dealt with probate?
I know a lot of people have.
Maybe before marry, they sign a contract. My money is separate.
That's a
my money is
prenup. That's a prenup.
Okay.
Those are good too.
So the probate, from what I understand from the experiences that I've had with other people, is that basically before they disperse any of the monies or the house, it has to go through the court. And whatever you owe, they have to take from that. And then after that's done, it could be 2-3 years from there. At that point, then they will give you the rest of it.
Yeah, so the reality is most people don't know what is probate in our community. That's why there's a lack of awareness around these things, because people haven't had to deal with the mess of what is probate, right? That's the crux. It's the court system by which assets transfer. If I want to buy your house but you're not alive, I have to go through your family has to go through a court proceeding called probate, and that probate proceeding is one that is messy, that is expensive, that takes a long time, that's totally that's avoidable if you take the steps to avoid it, which we will talk about in a second. So, what is community property and what is separate property? What is community property? Who knows what community property is?
The joint property for both?
Joint property. So let's say that in that scenario, Aisha had a job. She was making 100K a year, and Ahmed, he's sitting at home playing video games all day. So what does community property law say?
50% each.
Community property law says half the money is
Husband or wife.
Aisha's, half of it is Ahmed's, the guy who sat home all day and played video games. He didn't do anything. But under Arizona law, he gets half. You know, most of the time people say Islamic law is unfair to women, but tell me, under Arizona law, how does that make any sense? The guy was sitting at home playing video games and he's chilling. He doesn't need to do anything, right? So that's what community property is. It doesn't matter which spouse earns, it's deemed to be 50-50. Okay? Inside of the 50-50 notion, whichever spouse earns the money, it makes no difference. In case of death or divorce, it's going to be equal. Okay, is that the Islamic presumption of property? No. Now, if you want that to be the case, you say, look, I work, my wife stays home, she's taking care of the family, I want to make it 50-50, that's fine, right? You're making a gift of assets, but essentially you both have to agree on the clarification, and this is the most critical and complicated part of the entire part of estate planning. How can we do thumun, sudus, rubu' if we don't define what is the estate? 5-6 minutes. Okay, well, I'll wrap up and we'll do questions after. After. Okay? Yes?
You said will is not restricted, and Arizona doesn't have Islamic.
I'm going to come to what is the solution.
Then what's the problem?
Yes, very good. So I'm going to come to the solution. Understand community property is 50-50, and you cannot apply fractions unless we know the denominator. Right? You can't do fractions unless you know the denominator. So you must have clarity about who owns what. For a married couple, it's absolutely critical to define who owns what. If you drop everything into joint accounts and you don't really pay any attention, that's fine. Your life is good, alhamdulillah. But what about on death? How do we divvy things up if we never talked about it in life? So we must talk about it. It's critical. Okay. Now, I'm going to move in 5 minutes to the concepts of how we solve these problems in the United States. Okay, so we went from Sharia, we went to property law. Now, what is the solution? What do we do? I think every Muslim in America should have these 4 items. You have a will. I said the will doesn't do anything. Why should you make a will? You should make a will at least at a minimum if you have young children. If you have children that are underage, you should have a will, because if both parents pass, who takes custody of the children? Who?
The state.
The state. Well, Allah protect us, that's the worst case scenario. So anybody who is a parent should have a will that stipulates, if I die, I'm naming Ahmed, Sarah, Khalid, Aisha, whatever, to be guardian of my children, if nothing else. I'm not talking about money right now. I'm just talking about at least have that, right? Yes, you can have it for wealth distribution as well, but I like the trust way, way, way more. Number 2, power of attorney. So most people don't die suddenly. Most people don't die suddenly. What typically happens? There's a bunch of doctors here, right? Hospitalization, incapacity, right? Sort of usually there's a period of incapacity in which a person cannot make decisions. Those decisions, you should designate who makes financial decisions for me, and very importantly, who makes healthcare decisions for me, right? How many times are there disputes about end-of-life care? What's appropriate, what's not? Advanced directives are so underutilized in our community. I think it's critical, would you agree, Dr. Sutton, that there's a need for this? I mean, people fight. You're supposed to be reading Quran, making dua, and they're yelling at each other about what to do. You're trying to kill him, crazy things, right? Designate who's in charge, who should be the decision maker, and then at that scenario, what is the appropriate measure? Maybe they make mashwara with certain people, maybe you've already identified it. You know, when you turn 16, and you go, and your child goes and gets a license, what do they have to decide at that moment? Do they want to be an organ donor? Do you think there's a lot of thought about that question? If they say yes, without thinking about it, and the child dies in a car accident, Allah protect us, do you have the ability to say no? No, you don't. The first person declaration trumps the family's decision. I'm not saying halal or haram right now. I'm just saying understand that there's a lot of importance around these decisions that we don't really think about, right? So it's critical that we talk about these. Now, finally, in the last few minutes, what is the solution that I think is the best? As a practicing estate planning attorney, I think it's a trust. A revocable living trust. Okay, a revocable trust is something that generally most clients, not even Muslims, want to do because it allows them to avoid the court system. Whatever you put in the bucket, you can control and you can distribute upon death. The way you want, outside the court system, on the first death, on the second death, with people you choose. Okay? So now if you privatize the whole thing, what's the benefit? It's you get to do whatever you want. The state allows you to do whatever you want, as long as you make the effort to do so. I mean, we live in a country that allows you to do things your way, if you take the steps to do it. Right? I mean, it's a perfect system. No, I didn't say it's not respected. I'm saying it doesn't accomplish the goals. But a trust is a bucket you create, you move your assets inside, the house can be inside, the 401k beneficiary can be the trust, the cash can go inside of the trust, the IRA, the stock accounts, whatever. Everything can be inside of this trust. And that allows you to allow for succession outside of probate on the first death as well as on the second death. It's basically win-win-win for everything. You don't have to go through a difficult, public, inefficient probate proceeding. You can stipulate, for example, that my child is going to inherit not at 18, but maybe a little bit older. Maybe they haven't reached the rushd yet. Allah says, فَإِنْ أَنَسْتُمْ مِنْهُمْ رُشْدًا فَاتَّبِعُوا. Once they reach rushd, then give them their wealth. What's rushd? It's a complicated question. Maybe we can build that question into the trust, right? And similarly, can we avoid taxes? We don't want to give taxes to the government that we can avoid. We can structure, ideally, inside of a trust to avoid those taxes as well. So, to close, you can transfer assets into the trust. You can avoid probate. It's valid in every state. Okay? And you can clarify ownership, his, hers, ours. What's your wife's, what's your husband's, what's yours? All of that can be defined inside of the trust. Okay. So, we're going to stop here for Salah. I want to just mention a couple things. One is, okay, that's cool, sounds good. The biggest question everybody has generally is, how much does it cost? Right? That's the foundational question everyone asks. Generally speaking, if you go to an attorney, and I don't recommend doing trust by yourself. If you go to an attorney, the usual cost is somewhere between $2,000 and $6,000. It's a few $1,000s, like that's the expectation that one should have, because it's complex. There is stuff that is involved when you do this. It's not as simple as writing a will. You can make a will online, you can do it, in fact, you have a free will tool, you can do it for free. But it's not good enough most of the time, right, for most people. And so for that reason, that's usually the trust. One last thing I will mention, for those of you that work at Intel, how many of you have worked for Intel or one of the larger companies that have legal insurance programs? Few people, right? Those programs, and MetLife in particular, you can get the entire thing covered at no cost, like through the insurance. So it's something that you should take advantage of. If your employer provides it as a service, you should register for it if you don't already have it. And if it's an open enrollment, you can do that. And it's something that we can do for you through that insurance program, and it's something that I think is a great benefit if you happen to work for a large employer that provides it. Some hospital systems, certainly Intel and Honeywell and a lot of the larger